If you think the forces propping up Biden aren't thinking about declaring a climate emergency in some form during his first term, you haven't been paying close attention.
The administration is weighing right now, but do not plan to come out with today, is creating this emergency declaration that would give them wide scope to really tackle climate change in terms of propelling clean energy construction and even stopping fossil fuel use.
A lot of the damage that we are suffering with comes from regulations issued by unelected bureaucrats. Okay, so the information I'm about to show you comes from the American Action Forum. So in the first 30 months of the Obama administration, they passed 926 new regulations for a total cost to the taxpayers of $222.4 billion. And we can't forget about the associated paperwork that goes along with implementing those new regulations. And that came in at $145 million. But not to be undone, the Biden administration already has 620 regulations, so not as much numerically as Obama. But the cost of Biden's regulations are $395 billion, with associated paperwork costs of $232 million. Okay, and if that doesn't make your head explode, last week, the Biden administration issued an additional $19 billion in total regulations, with the associated paperwork costs of $4.4 million in annual paperwork expenses. That was just for last week. This is not a real issue. Climate change is a fake issue. But the damage that has already been caused by the Obama administration and the Biden administration is not enough for Congress. Congress right now is pushing for a, quote, declared emergency. Why? Because it's hot outside. So what's the point of asking for a declared emergency? Because in the process of declaring an emergency, the administration would take on so much more responsibility. They can make decisions about our lives without having to go through the troublesome aspect of congressional approval. This kind of thing has already been going on around the world.
Dozens of nations have already declared a climate emergency, including the entire European Union. And now, after accusing climate skeptics of inventing a conspiracy theory about climate lockdowns, there has been increasing talk of instituting climate lockdowns, modeled after COVID lockdowns and under a system called environmental authoritarianism, in which your right to drive a car or fly in a plane or own a big house could be suspended by the government in order to fight climate change.
Americans have to do with less. We're going to drive less, fly less, eat less meat. They're already talking about sustainable housing, shutting down the suburbs. This is the progressive vision of how you make people do with less in a climate emergency.
I want you to listen to a little clip from a recent speech that John Kerry made about agriculture. And fasten your seatbelts for this one.
Agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions of the world. And we can't get to net zero. We don't get this job done unless agriculture is front and center as part of the solution. But with a growing population on the planet, we just crossed the threshold of 8 billion fellow citizens around the world. Emissions from the food system alone are projected to cause another 0.5 degree of warming by mid-century on the current course that we are today. A 2-degree future could result in an additional 600 million people not getting enough to eat. And you just can't continue to both warm the planet while also expecting to feed it.
Okay, so this character is making all sorts of assumptions that's based off of faulty material. Every one of these climate activists point to some model that says this is what could happen. These are all based on computer modeling. There are absolutely no facts backing up these climate activists. This is all about power. This is all about control. This has nothing to do with climate change, and please do not buy into that. You know what, for the fun of it, let's compare the West's philosophy toward farming and agriculture, with all of this genetically modified engineering and all of these pesticides and paving over perfectly good farmland. So let's take all that and let's compare it to Vladimir Putin's philosophy on agriculture.
Политики пророчили нам депрессию и спад потребительского сектора. Обещали пустые полки магазинов, массовый дефицит товаров, провал сектора услуг. Однако жизнь по-другому распорядилась. Сами западные страны в полный рост столкнулись с такими же проблемами. Дошло до того, что их руководители предлагают своим гражданам вместо салата и помидор перейти на репу. Репа – хороший продукт, но и за репой, наверное, тоже к нам придется ехать, потому что уровень урожая все-таки у нас значительно превышает те показатели, которые есть в...
Vladimir Putin, the Russian's president, he's passed a law that any Russian who grows or sells genetically modified foods is to be considered a terrorist. He's even giving land away to Russians who will grow food organically, non-GMO. Absolutely right.
So Vladimir Putin has criminalized GMOs, and he's given away land to anybody who wants to do some organic farming. I don't know, guys, but you know what? I think that in a few areas out there, the West can learn an awful lot from Mr. Vladimir Putin. Hey, just saying. Okay, so let me close out this video with two quotes, both of them from Henry Kissinger. The first quote is going to be familiar to those of you who know me. But then I've got another one that you are not going to believe. Okay, so let's start with the first quote. If you control the food, you control a nation. If you control the energy, you control a region. If you control the money, you control the world. These are the lessons that have been adopted by the elitists, by the globalists who are behind all this climate change garbage, behind all of these liberal policies throughout the world that's destroying Western civilization. So now let's look at a quote that you are not going to believe. This is lifted from a speech that Henry Kissinger made to the World Health Organization on the subject of eugenics in 2009. Are you ready for this? Once the herd accepts mandatory forcible vaccination, it's game over. They will accept anything. Forcible blood or organ donation for the greater good. We can genetically modify children and sterilize them for the greater good. Control sheep minds and you control the herd. Vaccine makers stand to make billions, and many of you in this room today are investors. It's a big win-win. We thin out the herd, and the herd pays us for providing extermination services. Now, what's for lunch? Okay, so it's unclear whether that last line, now what's for lunch, was actually in the speech, or whether someone just threw that in as a joke. But I can see him saying it. So again, let's go back and read that last line again. We thin out the herd, and the herd pays us for providing extermination services. So this is the mindset. This is the philosophy of the elites who are trying to change the world. And they are succeeding.
Oxford City Council has taken the climate crisis extremely seriously. So we declared a climate emergency a couple of years ago. And since then, we've worked on lots of measures to reduce our carbon emissions.
You know, it's all part of a process, really. Climate change is here, you know, we need to adapt quickly.
Would prefer. Have you seen our 15-minute cities in the UK?
I've heard of it. Tell me about it.
It started in Oxford. I have very little sympathy for them because I was out there campaigning in Oxford saying if you vote for these parties, they're going to put these 15-minute cities in place. And guess what happened? They voted for these parties and now they've got these 15-minute cities in place. But it means that you can't leave your zone. Like, you can't drive to the other end of town. You are supposed to live within your 15-minute city. They've put the CCTV cameras in so you can fine you for leaving your city. They've done it the
What is happening?
Yeah,
this is happening?
Yes.
Why am I surprised?
It's essentially a climate lockdown is what it is, because they're saying it's too bad for the environment for people to be driving all around the city.
Could climate lockdowns be on the horizon? According to Nigel Farage, the answer is yes.
So here's the background. The background, of course, is all about climate change. Mayor Sadiq Khan of London has made most of central London 20 mile per hour speed limits. I'm not joking. It's 20 mph, even on dual roads in most of London. Speed cameras are being installed every single day of the week, and even at 2 o'clock in the morning. If you're doing 23 miles per hour, you will get flashed, you will get penalty points, and a fine.
Many years now, Democrats have realized that the only way to turn their radical plans into a reality is to take more power and money from the American people and give it to Washington. They want control over almost every aspect of your life.
We can't drive our SUVs and, eat as much as we want and keep our homes on 72 degrees at all times.
We see Obama's heirs carrying on his mission control.
In the same way that we have taxed cigarettes, we're going to have to tax carbon.
We have to take combustion engine vehicles off the road as rapidly as we can.
Would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
Reduce red meat specifically.
Yes, I would.
It's going to be our focus. Our focus was to get Trump out of office, right? Without saying it, that's what it was, right? So our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
So that's like the next.
Climate thing is going to take years, so they'll probably be able to.
We have to find a way to push back. The first thing you can do is that every opportunity you get, you vote against these elitists.
Copy that.